Hello.
Hey, sorry I'm late.
Oh, no, it's okay, Dr. Hotez. Thank you for doing this. So in March 27th, 2020, you wrote an article and you were talking about combating anti-science, engaging a skeptical public.
The anti-vaccine movement, really the modern form, began in the early 2000s after the Wakefield paper alleging that the MMR vaccine caused autism, which I spent a lot of time debunking because I'm a vaccine scientist. I'm also a pediatrician and parent of an adult daughter with autism, and wrote a book called Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, which really goes into this in detail. And then in 2020, it took yet another turn in this time of COVID-19, because intuitively you would think when people are clamoring for a COVID-19 vaccine, maybe the anti-vaccine movement would go into retreat or into hiding or go underground, but instead it re-energized because what was an anti-vaccine movement now glommed on protests against masks and social distancing. And this is now one of the major reasons why it's been so hard to combat COVID-19 in the United States.
Yes, there's a malignant force on the other side against the science of what we know, what we study, what we dedicate our lives to. What about the people on that side that don't know any better because they are not informed and they live in a bubble? How do we pierce that, or do we even attempt it?
Most people are not deeply dug in. They're just so inundated with information or disinformation that they don't quite know how to respond. And most of those individuals you can have a conversation with, but it takes time and you have to have the bandwidth to reach them. Then there's another segment that is deeply dug in and believes the conspiracy theories and has even tied their political allegiance to being defiant of masks and social distancing and now vaccines. That's really tough to disentangle. And this has been the hard thing for me this year. And then the other thing that happened in 2020, in addition to becoming an anti-science movement, it spread into Western Europe. So all this summer you had anti-mask, anti-vaccine rallies in Paris, London, Berlin, with reports that it was even linked to the political extremism on the far right, maybe even neo-Nazi groups and QAnon. So it's taken this very dark turn. And the question is, what do you do about it? Clearly there's been a lot of effort now to manage the message. I think scientists could have a role in helping to combat it, because especially physician scientists, because we know the information probably better than anyone and how to actually talk about it. It's not for everybody, but I think clearly being a scientist to be able to talk about vaccines and what vaccines do and don't in a knowledgeable way, I think is very powerful. And one of the ways I think we can combat this growing and increasingly politicized anti-vaccine group.
African American communities. We know there are separate segments of especially in the Houston area, our different populations that have been affected. I've seen them in the units. I've taken care of them. Specifically toward African American communities, there's a lot of skepticism regarding this. And there's an article by Rakaya Yerby in an online journal called The Appeal, Confront and Remedy the Black Community's Skepticism on COVID-19. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, what is your experience in regards to this skepticism, and how do we overcome it?
Yeah, I mean, the Kaiser Family Foundation just came out with a survey last week, and the number one vaccine hesitant group were what they called Republicans, for reasons that we spoke about, that how the anti-vaccine movement took this pivot to the far right beginning in 2015. But the other group they identify as the African American community, and there I think the forces are quite different. No question, there's historic and structural racism and the infamous Tuskegee experiment that didn't finally end until the 1972, I think it was. So this built appropriately a lot of mistrust by the African American community. But the other piece to this that many people don't talk about is some of the anti-vaccine groups have specifically targeted the African American community. They staged rallies in Harlem at the end of last year. And that, I think, has contributed a lot to it as well, that the African American community has been specifically targeted by anti-vaccine groups. So we have a lot of work to rebuild that trust and to try to counter the anti-vaccine misinformation. And we know it's especially important because, if you look at the deaths in the African American community from COVID-19, I mean, first of all, the hospitalization rates, death rates are much higher compared to other populations. So we're losing a lot of, 40, 50, early 60-year-old mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. And that's why it's so important to prevent this disease.
I know, and it's hard, and it's crazy because I'm on the other side of this, and I see these families, and I have to call them on the phone or FaceTime them, and if I look at my list, if I start my day and I look at my list, and it's predominant African American and Hispanic populations, and over the last 9 months, that has been the theme. That has been the trend. Watching you on Wolf Blitzer, for example, or whatever network or whatever, you have 1,000 YouTube videos. You're gonna, no matter what, be pulled into that political realm.
This has been the hard thing for me this year, going on the cable news networks, and because the message was always, hey, just stick to the science, just stick to the science. And the only way to disentangle it is to call it out. And it's put me in a very difficult position. I'm definitely out of my comfort zone here, going into this political realm.
There was a new report from the Center for Countering Digital Hate, the CCDH, in regards to social media and the anti-vaccination propaganda, hoaxes, and information or misinformation that's out there in the public. Do you feel the media misinformation is a culturally bound phenomenon? Does it change from country to country? Because it seems particularly bad in the United States. Yeah,
it is particularly bad in the United States because the U.S. has the best funded, most active anti-vaccine groups. The anti-vaccine movement now dominates the internet. So if you're trying to download meaningful information about vaccines, especially COVID-19 vaccines, you're more often than not getting garbage. You're getting, misinformation. On top of that, now we're learning from U.S. and British intelligence that the Russian government is piling on anti-vaccine misinformation on the internet, and in forms of bots and trolls, and there's even a new term for it called weaponized health communication. So that's creating a lot of damage too. So we're going to have a lot of work coming out, not only amplifying the pro-vaccine message, but figuring out how to launch a counteroffensive against what I call the anti-vaccine empire or confederacy, which is now full-on anti-science extremism.